picking up stuff.
Yeah, the
Trying to
wind.
rearrange the cover over my garden that all washed out. Some
All
on
right. Yeah. Yeah.
well, why don't we get going? We do have a quorum, so
Great.
I will, excuse me, call to order the meeting of Wenham Finance Committee at 6:35 on Wednesday, January 10th. This meeting is being recorded. And first up on the agenda was a uh, invitation for Rich Souza to join us this evening.
Yeah, and I'm wondering if I might have dropped the ball on this, Jeff. Because it occurred to me this afternoon. I was like, oh, when I was the chair, I always made the invites, and this afternoon I thought, oh God, I never really checked with checked with Jeff Calder to see if he had
No,
reached out. But we've got some answers from him already, and I mean, I do have a cell. I can ping him if if we have questions that come up. Or whatever. But yeah, my apologies on that. I will make a point to do the invites moving forward. I just, like I say, I didn't even give it a thought because I usually did it when I was on the finance committee, and just thought of
yeah,
it being the same way. But I know we have
yeah,
some
my
answers
bad.
from
I think it was
Rich.
a finance director that was doing that last year, but yeah, I
Okay,
just need to communicate a little better and
all right. So lesson
no,
learned
no,
there.
no gaps.
Um, but I would say, as you can see, I mean, we had some questions we sent along, and he's certainly very quick with fairly thorough answers.
Yes. So, I know I had sent some questions. Were some other questions forwarded to him for his response?
Oh, were there more questions in the first batch I sent him?
Yes. Were there?
Well, I got you answers to the first batch you sent me. Was there another batch of questions after that?
No, I'm just putting it to
Oh,
Scott or David if
I
they've
didn't
sent.
have any that I sent over.
No.
okay. Yeah. Oh, yeah. So yours were the only ones I got, Jeff.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'm the liaison for
And
DPW too,
I,
so I've spent some time with
you're
Rich.
informed.
Um,
Yeah.
I have a couple items, but this might even be a question that Jeff Szilard, you would know best. One of the things I was looking at is just how do you forecast the snow and ice budget? It would seem like you'd sort of set a median and would be the same number every year, but I guess maybe there's some.
Actually, no. So
Okay.
snow and ice is one of the more unique budgets in a municipality. So snow and ice is pretty much the only budget you can overspend under state law, because, as you say, it's unpredictable and you don't know. And so,
Right.
that you're allowed to overspend it. And at the end of the year, when you get towards, after you get out of snow season, you're in, March, April, May, you start to look at it and say, okay, are we over by, $20,000, $30,000? Can we take it from some other DPW line items? Can we do
Sure.
whatever?
Yeah.
If you have a year like 2015 where the snow budget is four times what it normally is, what makes it unique is you actually can overspend it, and if you don't have the ability within that current year's budget to somehow absorb it across other line items, you can actually put it on the next year's tax rate. So if you have $100,000 that you couldn't account for, you could then just add it to the tax rate when you set the tax rate, the following November or whatever.
Got
But
it.
what the state of Mass does, what the DOR does, is because this is a unique budget where you can overspend it. They essentially want you to fund it at the same level. They don't want you to have your funded at a lower level than you had in the past.
Got
Because if
it.
you think about it, it's a loophole. You could drop the snow and ice budget down to $10,000 and then
And then
overspend it and sort of try to circumvent Prop 2.5. So
got it.
usually you just sort of stay similar. I know we did after 2015. A lot of times I think we're able to say to the DOR, like, this is going to be a high. We're never going to get 7 feet of snow in 3 weeks again, or certainly not every
Right.
year. Don't make us make that our new high
Watermark.
water mark. But
Yep.
yeah,
Yep.
typically you'll stay right around where you were the prior year.
Got it. Okay, yeah, that's what I was questioning on the budget. So you sort of pick up where you were from the prior. Okay.
Yeah, and you can see there what you really have is probably a 2% tick up on the guys who plow for the DPW. They've got
Yep.
some overtime that will click up a little, so you see a small increase there.
Yep, got it.
Okay, well, why don't I do this then? For the benefit of David and Scott, I will read the questions that I forwarded or asked to be forwarded to Rich that Jeff Tillard had forwarded to them and what the responses are. So the first question that I had posed or request was I had asked that he describe what the service provided by the newly requested stipend of $3,500 for a cemetery is. Why is the task not performed by a DPW worker in the normal course of their job? And how will the person be selected to perform the task and be paid the stipend? And the response was, this is a stipend that will be applied to the DPW administrative position. The admin position is only allotted 23 and a half hours a week for highway and 13 hours for water responsibilities. When the cemetery issues come up, they're unscheduled and generally immediate needs that need to be resolved fully. This takes time away from the administrative position for highway and water, and the admin will often have to work longer hours to finish the day-to-day DPW responsibilities. This has been discussed with Steve P. in length, and he agrees that the stipend should be applied.
And just to provide a little bit more color on that, so Sheila, who is the administrative clerk who supports both the DPW and the water department, she doesn't get paid overtime. So and I can tell you as someone who's in the building later most days, she is someone who is not a out the door at 4:30 every day sort of person. So she's definitely someone who's putting in some extra time. And I'm going to let Finn in here. Huh. Do you see Finn just emailed that he's oh, there he is. So yeah, so Sheila is definitely someone who's been an exemplary employee for the DPW and the water department for years. She's well received here as a hard worker, and she I confirmed today with the payroll folks, like, she doesn't get any overtime on those days that she is working a little bit later. So I know in talks with both Rich and with Steve, it's something they've wanted to address for a bit. Because for what she provides up there, she's probably not adequately compensated just in general. But this was one area that when you think about it, there's people calling in, they're grieving, whatever. It can be a difficult thing that you have to drop everything and deal with that in real time.
Yeah, very good. Okay.
Is that something we've looked at? Like, I know it comes up department by department in terms of admin support, and obviously it's sort of a departmental, and there's people sort of half half their time, or it's a part-time job. Have you looked at that with Steve yet, or are you fielding lots of questions on
Not a
support?
whole lot. I mean,
Okay.
what I can say is, so just again to use Essex as a comparison. So in Essex, we have a 40-hour a week administrative staff person in the DPW/water sewer department. We also have a 19-hour-a-week part-timer. So we're throwing 59 hours a week at supporting DPW, water, sewer, and much like here, there's a cemetery department as well. Yep. So, clearly there's a sewer department that adds a little bit more, workload in Essex, but here you're looking at 37 and a half hours of admin time versus roughly 59. So I think from what I've seen since I've been here in this particular instance, you benefit from having a long-term employee who kind of has all kinds of efficiencies and things cooked in that makes it so she can get through handling the two departments basically in sort of more limited hours. We had a couple of situations like this in Essex where we knew we had very, kind of older, more seasoned employees that were able to, do things very efficiently. And we know when that woman, retires, say in the treasurer's office, nobody else is going to be able to do that same role in 32 and a half hours. So I think that's probably similar to the situation here in Wenham with the DPW/water person. I know both Eric and Rich speak highly of Sheila, and how well she works. But I don't know if we have as many departments that share like that beyond that. In Essex, we have more of these people kind of shared across departments, but this is the biggest one I think we have in Wenham is this share. And, and honestly, the departments are broken out separately here versus in Essex, it's, DPW, water, sewer. And it's, here, if it was set up like Essex, Sheila really wouldn't be split. She would be under one umbrella, but it's just, we happen to break it out here that way. But yeah, it's nothing I've looked into too detailed, David, but that's my take on
it. Because as a liaison, there were
I think we're losing you, David.
When it comes to budgets. Oh, did you guys lose me?
You're in and out, and we're catching about every fifth word, I think.
Yeah. It looked like you're still frozen. Everybody else seems good.
Just for Finn's benefit, we were talking about the $3,500 stipend for cemetery. And that individual, the individual we paid that stipend is the person in the admin position for highways and for water. She's working a full-time job between those two departments. To the extent that something comes up with the cemetery, she's kind of going to drop what she's working for water or highway, work on what's come up for cemetery as an issue or as a need, and then make up what she wasn't able to do for highway and water. It sounds like on her own time, which is not being compensated because she's not being paid overtime. So this is a matter of I guess fairness or equity for her that she be compensated for those extra hours.
I don't have the documents in front of me. Appreciate that, Jeff. Is this a new expense for this year, or is this just a kind of renewing and something that's been going on for a couple of years now?
It's an ad.
It's an ad. Okay.
Which is why I had flagged it as a follow-up question for Rich Souza, who unfortunately is not joining us tonight because he was not invited.
Yes, and that was, again, my fault. I apologize.
Miscommunication, between Jeff Soulard and Jeff Calder, which we will resolve before next week when we invited
probably police, I think.
Public safety. No, libraries next week. we'll figure it out before
Yeah.
next. So
Um,
the next question that I had asked that Rich provide a little more color on was when I looked at the capital budget, I saw that the DPW currently has 5 mowers. And then the purchase of an electric mower in FY25, I viewed as the acquisition of a 6th mower. So I was asking uh, to describe in a little more detail for us why they need a 6th lawnmower, and if there are sufficient DPW staff that can deploy those 6 mowers and actually operate them all at the same time. Otherwise, why do we need 6 if 3 are sitting and 3 are in use was kind of what I was driving at with the question. And of the mowers, do they have a specific rather than a general use? And evidently, the the electric mower is not, in fact, an add to the fleet. And please back that up, Jeff Szilard, because I think you've had conversations with Rich.
yeah.
And
So
it
I
is,
think
it's
the
going to be a
genesis of this.
five mower fleet.
Yeah, and the genesis of this is that there is a push from I think a few different groups within town boards pushing for the town to be greener, and this is one of the areas that there's been a real push for us to add an electric mower. And so I think I can see what Jeff is saying about in the spreadsheet he pointed out to me. It clearly looks like it's it's not a replacement of an old one. It's a new ad, but I believe, and I've confirmed with Rich that I think it was just they were trying to make a point that they were buying this new type of mower and wanted it to be clear that they were buying this new electric mower. But if they were to move forward with that, it would be trading in an older mower, which it looks like the oldest mower we have is about 9 years old. But in talks with Rich last week and even yesterday, they're probably going to table this for a year anyway, just because it's shaping up to be a rather large capital year. So if it's not an immediate need, much like the Bobcat, they're sort of moving that to the next year. So I believe that will probably be off the table by the time we get to the meeting next week.
Okay, that's helpful. Is that spreadsheet did make it look like we were getting both an electric to replace the 48-inch and an electric as an ad that would be 60-inch. But maybe the question still, is still valid. Do 5 mowers get deployed at the same time? But I don't know. Maybe they break down. Maybe.
Yeah, and I can ask him that more pointedly. I will say, and based on my experience with Essex, is you might not have 5 going all the time. And maybe this is just us, holding equipment longer in Essex, but there's almost always one in the shop for something or another. So, you've kind of got one as a spare because one of them is typically down. But I can certainly follow up. Do we use 5 at a time, or is it one of them? We always have to have one extra because you never know if one is, got some, whatever, pops a pin, does something where it's inoperable, and you need to get your guys out there and get them mowing. My assumption is, that's typically the older one that, is probably like the last resort that's out there as the replacement, but I will follow up with Rich on that one.
And for all I know, the 72-inch goes only certain places, and it can't go places that the 48-inch goes. But I don't know. It just seems to beg the question. There's a lot of mowers.
Yeah, I think you're 100% right on that, though, is that, all things being equal, they'd have all 72-inch mowers to, reduce the amount of time they spent mowing. But I think, you're right. There's, certain mowers fit certain places and certain, turn areas and things like that. But all good questions.
Okay.
And Rich is pretty on top of that stuff, so I'm sure he'll have pretty pointed answers on all of it.
The next question I raised was, or the request was that we get a little more information on what the purpose of fuel tracking software is and why is it necessary if it's not something we've had in the past. And the response was, or is, the current system has had very little security for fuel theft. The DPW provides fuel for all town departments, and for the past 3 years, all of Hamilton's town departments. Currently, the setup is a barrel key system where each department receives a number of keys to activate the system and dispense fuel. Currently, there are 40 different locks, each with their own totalizer, where a monthly gallon reading is taken for each. The new system will track each user, which a vehicle identification, i.e. truck number, that'll be needed to be input along with mileage. The DPW director will have real-time software readings tracking all transactions. The director will be able to track fuel dispenser activity and gallon totals down to the minute. A lot said here. Long story short, someone would not be able to fill up their vehicle, then their gas pails to bring home and fill their snowblower. Also, I can't get into details, but fuel theft has been identified in the past. Additionally, they've provided some a fact sheet on the software if we are interested in looking at it a little more carefully. So it sounds like principally this is about keeping track of where the fuel's going and having a system that is going to hold people accountable and stop theft. And allow
Which would also mean
for more accurate charge back to the right departments that are using the fuel.
well, probably also means that it would, I don't know how much the software, I don't have the sheet in front of me, but it could probably pay for itself then if it actually is doing its job well and if theft is enough of an issue.
Yeah, 25 grand.
Yeah, and just so you know, I don't know if folks, understand, not every town has their own fuel. As the email Jeff was just reading alluded to, Hamilton does have their own fuel, but they had an issue with their tanks and had to replace them. So in the interim, they were utilizing our fuel and sort of being charged back for it. But not every community has it. And so the big benefit to the towns is you sort of buy gas wholesale under a contract under the state. And you also, I believe it's the state gas taxes you don't have to pay. So when you think of when you go to the pump as a retail customer and you pay $4 a gallon or whatever it might be, I think what Rich gave me as a quote was, if gas is $4 a gallon at the pump, we're probably paying $3.65 or $3.70. So there's a fairly significant savings to the town for having this setup in place. So this software just becomes kind of a risk mitigation tool, to ensure that while we're enjoying a benefit, we're not also being taken advantage of as well. I mean, Rich mentioned the taking stuff home to your snowblower, but I didn't know if you could also just pull your Honda Accord up and put in 8 gallons as well. So it seems like if you amortize it over the whatever 5 or 10 years, it probably will prevent some level of theft or whatever that would make it a worthwhile purchase.
And then the last question that I had posed, or again, just a request for a little more information, seeing how we've entered into a refuse contract with Casella and some other providers, but it seems to be our expenses seem to be rising each year. And I just had asked that the basic terms of the existing refuse collection contracts be explained as a way of understanding why the costs are going up by 3% a year. And evidently that the existing 10-year contract has escalators in it that account for why the expenses are going up, even though we have a contract.
Yeah, and just to follow up on that, if we were entering the marketplace and trying to, start a new contract this year, we would certainly be seeing more than a 3% escalator. That's, what we've talked about a little bit, is that we know in a year and a half or so, and we're already kind of starting the process, but negotiating that next refuse contract is going to be a little bit of sticker shock, probably. We just went through this in Essex. David and Jeff might know, because they probably have to buy, to dispose of trash at places in Essex. It is the market is difficult right now for municipalities to get new refuse contracts, and you're also they've been shortening the length of contracts. I mean, we're in a 10-year contract. They're not issuing 10-year contracts anymore. They're really going more to like 3-year contracts, and being able to reset much quicker, because the pricing in the trash business, it is one of the faster rising businesses out there. So the businesses are not wanting to lock themselves into even, it sounds like 5 or 7-year contracts at this point. They wanted the ability to reset more quickly. The hope would be that maybe you'd only have, maybe you'd have somewhat smaller COLAs over the short-term contracts, but that's yet to be seen.
Sure. Yeah. So I guess the message is we should enjoy these 3% increases while we have them, because in 27 there is a material increase coming when we enter into a new contract. I think I've mentioned more, and of course Jeff Soulard knows it well, having just come from Essex, but owning property in Essex, I'm also kind of attuned to it. But yeah, there is no tax pay. There is no trash pickup
tax supported
as part of the town, the taxes that people pay in town. They have to pay a separate fee in order to access the transfer station, just to throw away or to leave recycling material. And then if you actually want to throw anything away now, you have to buy a bag. And what are those bags? $4, I think. They're
just like
the larger bags are $4.75. The smaller bags are like $2.75, I think.
You don't throw away any trash without putting it in a bag that you have purchased.
Yeah. And I think, Jeff, you raise a good point here. So, a lot of times we tend to circle back to talking about tax rates. And, that's why, it's not always the best way to compare and contrast communities, because, if you were to look at these two towns, while Essex has a lower tax rate, the rate in Wenham includes curbside trash pickup. The rate in Essex does not. So, the difference between 13.32 in Essex and 15.66 or whatever it is now in Wenham, there's a variable in there that those two things are not necessarily equal. And as we or our residents or whoever sort of compares and contrasts tax rates from one municipality to another, it's not always apples to apples across the board.
Right. Yeah. And maybe unsaid in this conversation, but I'm sure I've mentioned it before. You have to physically carry your trash in the bag you purchased to the transfer station, because there is no pickup. Although I think a number of people are now contracting individually with private trash haulers as an alternative, because they don't want to be driving to the transfer station with bags of garbage in their car. So yeah, good point. We are getting a service here that's folded into our tax rate that some very nearby communities do not. Well, those are the questions. Those are the 4 questions or areas that I had asked for a little more clarity on. I guess seeing that the group hadn't sent any additional questions to Jeff to forward to Rich. might as well move along. So next up on the agenda is a continuation of the discussion about potential uses of free cash. And I know we touched on this briefly in the last meeting, but I think we were running short on time, so didn't really spend a whole lot of time on that. Jeff, I don't know if that's handy for you to bring up for the benefit of anybody that may not have printed it and have it in front of them.
And which document is that? The
It would be the one page that has the capital spend, borrowing
right.
proposed, and also use of free cash.
All right, let's just
When
see.
we're saying potential uses of free cash, are we discussing it in terms of as it relates to capital in this year's budget, or generally speaking, ways that free cash can be used because we may find ourselves in a year with more free cash than usual?
This is specific. You know, there is a spreadsheet that Jeff had provided us that
Oh
actually
no,
had.
I know. I just didn't know from the way you phrased it. It's I couldn't tell if it was about the capital items or about like different ways that we could potentially use free cash in addition to the capital items, like
Oh,
reserve
okay. I'm sorry.
funds and things like
Right,
that.
right, right, right. Yeah, I think we can talk about both. If I
No,
think
it's
that,
fine. I just was wanted. I was
yeah, I think that's good.
figuring out
That's a
where
good
we're going with it.
observation. But yeah, I was thinking more specifically about proposed uses for capital purchases as
Got it.
opposed to borrowing.
Yeah, so let me see if I can share my screen.
But yes, also, you know, the idea of stabilization funds for various uses. Uh,
All right. Oh, that moved everything. But can people see that now? I'm dragged across different screens here, so I can't tell if you can see it.
yes.
Okay. Yeah, so this is, I think, is Jeff, this is what you're talking about. It's just a kind of quick one pager here.
Correct. Yeah, so I think we can have a conversation about the specific uses of proposed uses of free cash plus proposed capital spending, looking at this one document.
All right. So can you guys still see this? Because my screen has gone funky when I tried to drag it over.
I see it.
Okay.
We're seeing an email.
Yeah, it's in an email that should have sort of like a pivot table in it.
Yep.
Yeah. So this is just a very high level, look at what our total, sort of capital is looking like right now. There's definitely a few things that are probably going to get pulled out of here by the time we have the official meeting next week. But as you can see, this is talking about spending, 566,000 of free cash if all of these capital projects were to go through. That's going to be, essentially, so 2.2. That's going to use about 566 of about 2.2 million of free cash in that range. So you're looking at, you'd have 1.6 million, a little over 1.6 million left of free cash. And that would also include, as it's been proposed right now, and how Steve has pulled this together is, a few of these items would actually be, it's really over almost $1.1 million of total capital, with, roughly 520,000 being coming out of some kind of debt, which I think we'd like to see both of these numbers come down. And we know, trying to think what we've got here, trafficking software. Yeah, like we've already removed that. Looks like the mower. And I think we're finalizing this tomorrow to get ready for next week's meeting. So the hope is we can trim this down. But you're trying to balance, clearly we have free cash. You could actually use free cash to pay for all of this, but it would also wipe out your free cash down to about $500,000 or $600,000. And then you would, as someone was just mentioning, there are other uses for free cash. to think about. I mean, do you want to set money aside in stabilization for other things? We know apportionment is changing, at the school level, which will shift, more of the school costs to Wenham in the upcoming years. Certainly probably starting next year, we'll start to see a little bit of a shift. Do we want to start putting some money aside for that? Do we want to, build up our general stabilization fund? We're already attacking OPEB. That's another sort of 100,000 that's in this budget. But there's quite a few different things we can think of for uses of this free cash as well.
I seem to recall discussion in the past about grants that Wenham was going to be receiving to cover some sort of capital type costs, especially related to something like the is it the Biden transportation budget?
Yeah, I mean, so we there's a couple things there. So you all probably just went through it. I know you did. I spoke to Rich about it. The same sort of paving project that ran through Essex ran through Wenham, and that was a bunch of sort of that the Biden infrastructure money, that came through town and helped, sort of deeply subsidize the town's cost for road maintenance, because they, like in Essex, it was Route 22. Here, it was probably 1A or something like that. They get paid, paved without Rich having to do it. So that's one thing. But then I know the fire department are working on grants related to radios. Steve was just pinging the state rep on that the other day. And then, and they're constantly applying for different things. So certainly that's, with everybody assembled next week for the Capitol meeting, you can get a good breakdown of, when they gave us a preview the other day, a few folks led with, some of the things they might be thinking were possible grant funded. But it's interesting. Like you don't always know. I know we got one grant in Essex that, for the fire that Wenham didn't get, so it's and I'm sure there's instances of the opposite happening. You sort of never know, why you get some and don't get others, or vice versa. But it's clearly part of the culture here to look for grants. So certainly we should press departments on next Tuesday, I think it is, when we have the Capitol meeting.
All right, so this is not net of any grants, right, for any capital
as of right
project,
now. No.
Yeah.
Yeah, and more of the grants that certainly that we were seeing in Essex, and I think it is kind of the trend, is you're seeing more of these sort of matching grants. So we went for air tanks for the fire department, and we got a $250,000 grant, but we had to put $25,000 up front. They look for a 25%, a 10% match, or a 25% match, or something like that. You're seeing more and more of those, but still a great deal if you can get $300,000 worth of air tanks for $50,000 out of pocket or something like that. That it certainly helps whittle down this list a little bit.
That Capitol meeting is not proposed as a joint meeting. That's a select board meeting.
Oh, is it just select? Okay, I guess it's just me there. Certainly anybody can attend, and we could post for it if you wanted. Yeah, if anybody else wants 2 meetings next week.
I suppose for to be compliant with open meeting law, if more than 3 or more of us would plan to attend, then we have a quorum of FinCom members at a select board meeting.
Yeah. I mean, typically administratively, I would post that, and just, it would still be there, they would be recording it, and they being the selectmen, but at least we're posted, like you say, in case, you'll probably be there for sure. And maybe, if 2 other folks happen to check in, there are some protections if no one speaks. I know in Essex, we used to be worried about, if there's 3 of you there and Jeff Calder asks questions, or, it can be deemed that, well, that is him speaking to his board, even though the other 2 members might not actually participate in the discussion. the most strict reading of the open meeting law could be that, in fact, this was a way for Jeff to message, other members of the FinCom, without posting a meeting. So certainly we could just post a meeting and, not make it a required meeting, but we have it posted in case a couple people, happen to join you, Jeff.
Okay. Yeah, I think that'd be sensible. Don't want to run afoul of open meeting law. Yeah, so with respect to this page, we will have the public safety officials joining us, that they can be asked to respond directly to their requests for capital spend, either borrowed or paid through free cash. You can see on here, or maybe, why don't I back up? Could you give us a sense, Jeff Soulard, of where this is moving? So this is still a draft. It is evolving. There is a presentation next week by you and Steve to the select board of what the current requests are for capital and your proposal for either borrowing or free cash. Is that fair?
I think that's fair to say. I am meeting with Steve and Joe tomorrow to sort of finalize that. And so, coming out of that, I can certainly send whatever, I'm going to be tasked with updating the spreadsheet and sort of posting it to the shared drive, and all that. So I can certainly get that out to everybody as soon as we meet tomorrow. It's late morning, early afternoon. I think we're meeting to sort of finalize that. And Steve's been working with a few departments to sort of, work on trimming the list down. And the hope is that we'll be able to knock some of these things off, prior to the meeting where we actually present every, kind of a final push on Tuesday.
Sure. Okay. Well, then going from the top to the bottom with respect to DPW, $95,000 to supplement the Chapter 90 funds. We got to keep our roads in good shape. So if that's the price of filling potholes and keeping the roads safe, that would seem to be a good expenditure of funds.
Yeah, and actually, just to add on to that, so I don't know if any folks are familiar with, sort of the millionaires tax that has been implemented in Mass. Did pass a ballot initiative, and will be going into effect, which is essentially Mass has a essentially flat income tax rate. You pay 5% on most income, you pay 12% on short-term capital gains. What was proposed and passed at the ballot was adding essentially a surtax for folks who will make over $1 million to raise additional tax revenue to pay for to help pay for schools, roads, infrastructure, things like that. And so we've been told that our share of this new program is roughly another $80,000 for road work. So we get our typical Chapter 90 money. What you're seeing here on this, this list is an additional $95,000 on top of that. And then now we'll be getting, say, an extra $80,000 under this new, sort of millionaires tax program. So the question came up that I think will be a point of discussion next week is, do we use that $80,000 over and above this $95,000 request, or do we, sort of, supplement the $95,000 with this extra $80,000, revenue stream that will be coming in? And the interesting point that, kind of came up when I was talking to Rich the other day was that we're in the middle of he signs contracts for 3 years with the paving companies. And so we're in the middle of a 3-year contract with the paving company at current prices. And so the question becomes, we know the prices in the next contract will be going up. Do we say, well, this just, this is 80,000 more to allow us to buy more road at lower prices now, rather than, when the prices go up, in a couple of years, sort of pushing more into a year where we know the pricing is higher. And no decision's been made there yet, but it's, it was sort of an interesting thought of, you have more purchasing dollars if you sort of take that 80,000 and say, well, this is going to allow us to pave a lot more road more quickly at lower prices. So that's just an extra variable to kind of throw into that mix.
So Jeff, in that case, are you forward buying that capacity, I guess?
Well, I mean, you have that. So Rich does these contracts in 3 year, that gets the pricing in 3 year contracts. And typically we do our normal, Chapter 90 money. Plus we have historically, I think, I don't know if it started when Rich got here, if it was in place before, but there's been this supplemental, sort of road work that the town has been doing. But there's no limit on what we, necessarily what we can do. So there's nothing that says we couldn't, do an extra $80,000 worth of paving. It would just allow us to use these prices, rather than later. But yeah, you're not buying, like, you're not sort of, buying it and you'll allow us to pave 3 years from now at the lower price. You would have to actually, have them come and do the work now to enjoy that pricing.
You just pull forward the work now.
Yeah. Yeah, and maybe there's maybe that's not 100% the best idea. Maybe there's a sort of a middle ground of
you do some.
Well, let's take half of it and do $135,000 worth of paving this year at the lower prices. But I think as we talk about trying to minimize these capital expenses and borrowing versus free cash use, that extra $80,000 windfall becomes an extra kind of tool in the toolbox for us, I think.
Is there a formula, Jeff, on the millionaire tax on how much goes into infrastructure that you guys sort of know, or you just sort of get a number and you can't?
That's the first number we've heard is that we won't hear, the folks at the school district will hear any money that's going to flow through to the schools, but the infrastructure, slash paving, I haven't looked at what other communities are getting or how the formula shakes out, but they've kind of given us the number. What Rich was saying was it sort of falls in line with whatever the Chapter 90 formulas are. They just sort of, tacked onto that.
Got it. Okay.
And I would just add that something else I'd heard is going on is there's regular replacement of catch basins, but there's a move toward planting, combining new catch basins with the planting of trees in order to filter some of the water that would otherwise head into the sewers. It's at its slightly higher cost, but I think there's an initiative underway to try to promote that idea because it's more environmentally friendly and promotes more of a green agenda for the town.
Interesting.
Next up on the list for DPW is the fuel tracking software that we were discussing earlier. This is the $25,000 item. And then at the bottom under equipment, we see listed Bobcat, 1998 Bobcat. Was that?
So that was a $75,000 item that we pushed out. Rich had told me last week that we do these 5-year capital projections and try to predict where things where we'll need new vehicles, new equipment, or whatever. And then as you sort of close into the end of that 5 years, which would be the case with this Bobcat here, Rich evaluates that and says, this has got another year of, at least another year of utility. So we're going to, push this from a 25 item to a 26. And honestly, like, I think when I was talking to him at one point, it might be that it's not even another new Bobcat. He may decide that there's more utility in, in Essex, we call it like it's a whacker is the name of it, but it's kind of, I think of it as kind of like a Kubota. It's sort of a multi-utility tool that you can use to plow the sidewalks, and you can use to mow, and you can use to do different things. Rich is always evaluating those type of things. Like, is the Bobcat, at $75,000, does the Bobcat provide less utility than, a Kubota or something like that? So this, at the very least, he was, said we absolutely could move it out of 25. But it sounds like it's very much will be evaluated ongoing whether, a Bobcat is even the best tool for us moving forward.
Sure. Yeah, I thought this chart was really helpful. Provided a list of the equipment, the age of the equipment, an assessment of the condition, and then a look out 15 years of what the replacement schedule could look like. So yeah, it shows a lot of thought going into the timing of and what equipment for the DPW needs to be replaced.
Yeah, I mean, I would say they take, the fiduciary responsibility of overseeing, the town's assets pretty seriously. And, in my dealings with Rich, he's a real sharp guy, has a real good handle on what he has, what he needs, the timing of when he needs to replace it. And, as I mentioned, I think last week, the ability to also just not replace something because that's what we've always had, the ability to say, we don't need another 2-ton dump truck. Let's get a 1-ton dump truck at half the cost or whatever. You need that because, as we can see, the capital, challenges are there. And, without some creative thinking or ways to either minimize what we need or prolong how long we can keep it, it's going to be an ongoing problem. It is an ongoing problem, but sometimes you have to look and think it could actually be worse if, it wasn't being well managed by someone like Rich in the DPW.
And that is what this next item is, Jeff. That is the purchase of a $115,000 dump truck. That's what you were describing, the replacement of a 2-ton with a 1-ton.
Exactly. Yeah. So like I'm not a big, auto person or whatever, but when you think of, the 2-ton dump trucks is, I think of like the big vehicle you see on 128 plowing versus, when we do, in talking to Rich, we do need some of those. There are, certain snow events that, you need that kind of size and weight and leverage to push certain types of snow, or maybe in certain areas where the snow, accumulates and gets, pushed into certain areas or whatever. But you don't need, 3 of them. We've typically had that, but he just evaluated it and said, I'd rather have a smaller vehicle that will still be okay in the wintertime, but it will give me more utility to use that in the summer and the off season, doing other town projects.
Yeah.
And the 2-ton would be, I think, if I recall correctly, much closer to the 225, 250 range. Outfitted out, so it's a significantly larger purchase.
Yeah, for sure. Next item up is it's the 3rd year of a 3-year lease, so that is a contractual obligation to pay that $31,000. And next
exactly
on that list, well, that's the mower that we were talking about earlier, which sounds like is now going to be removed from the 25 budget and maybe placed in a coming year, or
yeah, I mean, they'll reevaluate it next year. I mean, I think the big question with that particular mower is, from what I can tell, Wenham as a community certainly has a commitment to sort of kind of being green or whatever. So I think there's, from a lot of places, there's a push to, purchase a slightly more expensive electric piece of equipment here. But I think there's also, to some degree, and we hear this a little bit sometimes, I think, in public safety too, should we be buying electric cruisers, Teslas or, whatever it might be. But at the same time, it's, if you're buying some of these, electric machines right now, we kind of become the beta tester. And, I know in Essex, I always felt, and I think in Wenham, I've heard a similar sort of thought from a few people is, you know, the smaller communities, it's tougher for us to be sort of the beta tester for some of these type of things. It's a lot easier for a Worcester or a Peabody or someone to buy 2 or 3 of these, and you know, if they don't work out or they, you know, they cost too much to maintain or whatever it might be, like, you know, let the larger communities kind of work out the kinks on these things, and you know, us smaller communities kind of jump in, you know, after some of those kinks are worked out. I know for some folks who are maybe a little more green, you know, there's more of a push to be like, you know, that's the wrong attitude. You need to just move forward with this. You know, we need to protect our planet and all that. And you know, and I'm not opposed to that, but certainly as someone who wears a finance hat, you do always have to be mindful of, you know, what are the other costs and risks associated with this, and do we really have a good handle on that? And I can't speak to like the mower quite as much, but certainly I don't think there's a lot of history, say, on electric police cars. So do we really want to be the first, you know, community who has a fleet of electric police cars, or do we want someone else to work out those bugs? So this one is definitely, I think, is sounding like it'll be pushed off a year. And then the question will be, you know, is it an electric machine next year, or is it a gas machine? You know, it'll probably be electric, but I think, you know, it's constantly being evaluated.
Do we know what the cost difference is between a comparable gas?
What he mentioned the other day was something about, you know, maybe closer to like, say, 18 for a gas powered machine. So it's, you know, it's not an enormous dollar amount, but on a percentage basis, it's a big difference. You know, I think the debate is, you know, yeah, but what do you spend on fuel and, you know, whatever? You know, maybe that evens it out if you're, you know, you're charging it and it's not as expensive as gas and whatever. Maybe it evens out. But I think when I asked him as well, if this, you know, this purchase price included like any extra battery packs or whatever, because I'm assuming you can't, you know, run these things for 8 hours a day on one, you know, one battery. You probably need to have a couple, you know,
battery packs. And then also, I mean, you're introducing essentially a separate maintenance stream. If you have 5 fairly similar mowers that you know how to fix, that's one thing, but you have 4 of one and 1 of another, that can introduce the whole extra amount of cost just to keep the fleet running.
Well, that's a good point, because we have a sort of mechanic, I believe, that works for the DPW that services equipment and some of the cars and whatever. So yeah, I mean, if he's not well versed in how to fix this, I mean, I just don't know enough. I mean, I know that when they talk about, you know, the electric vehicles, they sort of say, you know, the maintenance. I mean, you replace tires and brakes, and that's all you have to deal with. I don't know if it's you know, if there's much less maintenance with an electric mower or not, but I think that's a good point, Scott.
I mean, I know on the I have a friend who owns a car dealership, so I just know that from the electric car stuff, especially with the he does a lot of used car sales, and he needs to bring them back to the OEM in order to do a lot of the work. He can't even do it on site because it's, you know, it's even more of a computer than cars are computers now, and so
Right.
it is a lot of added cost in relation to transport and getting the work done, because you can no longer save the cost by doing it in house. I don't have any idea if that's the same with a mower, but I just, you know, there's obviously, it's a different skill set to work on different pieces of equipment, which obviously would need to be factored in.
Yeah, and I think that kind of gets back to my point of sort of like, why not let Peabody determine all those things,
Yeah.
you know, whatever, and then we sort of say, all right, now that we know it really isn't that big a deal or it isn't that different, yeah, let's buy one. But yeah, why be the first person that figures out, you know, the 10 things nobody thought of?
Has Peabody done it? Have they figured that
I
out?
don't know. I'm just using them as an example of like a larger
Yeah.
community that could, you know, buy 5 of them, and it's only a tiny percentage of their overall, you know, equipment.
Oh, that's the list within this schedule of potential capital expenditures for DPW. The group would like to look at some of the other items while we have Jeff with us. We can certainly do that, or hold questions related to fire and police until you know, we have Chief DiNapoli and Chief Kavanaugh here, or even this painting of the exterior of the library until Kim joins us next week. But
yeah, and we did
toss it
hear
out
that
to
the
the
quote
committee.
the quote on the library is actually much higher. It is much closer, I think, to $80,000 is the most recent quote we received on that. So so that that might be a different number by the time we see that again. And certainly when we talk to them next week. But I believe that I heard a number closer to 80 for the library at this point.
And just to be clear, right, since we're getting to the end of this, the number that I think were saying earlier was that the free cash that we have is a little more than $1.5 million, right? And you said that
It's about 2.2 ish.
2.2.
But if we were to, if we spent this whole 566 as listed here, you're down to 1.6, kind of right out of the gate. And just to think of that, so if we have 2.2, it's sort of a bifurcated number. 1 million is kind of the annual free cash we're generating. About 1.2 million is free cash that we've sort of rolled forward from prior years, as we went through the pandemic and different things. Most towns sort of took a conservative approach to free cash because the economic climate was so shaky and we weren't sure what the future was holding. We all sort of held on to that extra free cash. But at some point, we'll spend down, whether it's on capital or it's putting it in a stabilization or whatever, we'll kind of spend down that 1.2 million that we've been carrying. And then we'll be left with just kind of this, roughly $1 million that we're generating each year. That's more of our sort of, steady state for free cash generation.
And is there a benchmark for that, Jeff? Is it a certain percentage of your tax receipts that people like to have in free cash?
Yeah. So the DOR wants to see you somewhere in the range of 4 to 6% of your operating budget in free cash.
Okay. Yeah.
We in Essex, we actually put together financial policies that said we should be targeting 5% free cash and 5% of operating budget and stabilization as well.
Okay.
I think at some point I would like to see us do that here, kind of develop some some fiscal policies to sort of target these things, in conjunction with, the finance committee, the select board, a bunch of parties kind of getting in and saying, what makes sense. I mean, the free cash is always tricky because, on one hand, it's great because it allows you to do things like purchase capital items and handle unexpected things without incurring, debt or raising taxes. But at the same time, it's also because you're, prepaying taxes. You've overpaid what you needed in the prior year. You've paid in more than you needed to raise in taxes because you either spent less or you raised more money from other sources. So people are always mindful of, not raising, not having too much free cash because that could have been money in folks' pockets, but at the same time having, say, that 4 to 6% cushion so that when things do happen, you are able to, throw some extra money at the school district field project or things like that. Right. I think I mentioned it last week, but a town doesn't have the same sort of ability to be nimble as, say, a company does. We can't raise our prices. We can't, change, how we produce things. We can't really, take out debt without, going to a town meeting to do so. So, the free cash, is something that helps you be a little bit more nimble.
Got it.
Is that 4 to 6% generated each year or carried over after?
So yeah, the 4 to 6% would be the annual generation. It's funny. We used to debate this in Essex where, we had one finance person who was like, no, I think it means we can never have less than, 5% after we spend money on items. And I think, well, that would mean you need to be generating like 10% free cash so that you were left with net, 5%. So, I think the target is maybe generating the 4, 5, 6%. But yeah, you also wouldn't want to say, because if you think about, in Wenham, that's 5% is, 1.4-ish million or something like that. Like having to have that left after you paid for capital and did some other things, that's a pretty heavy lift, I think, on an annual basis. I mean, it would be nice if we could have that left after doing things. But I don't think it's, really possible, year in and year out. There's just too many things that crop up. So I would say it's the operating number.
Operating number inclusive or exclusive of schools?
Typically the DOR is saying with schools, so the entire, say, $24 million budget.
Okay. I was trying to understand how you're getting to 1.4 because I was at 720.
Yeah, so basically, yeah, it's like the entire
Okay.
general fund. So in our case, it wouldn't even include like the water budget because the water is self-sustaining on fees. So it really just be the general operating budget, including education. And actually, education is a good point there to make because not so much the Hamilton Wenham School, although you can see fluctuations based on apportionment, but the Essex Tech can vary greatly from year to year. So if you, like in Essex, we had a year where we went from 15 to 22 students or something, and it was a significant it was six kids times $20,000 a piece or something like that. So it was, we went from, we went up $120,000, $150,000. So having some free cash to, kind of buffer that as a, one-time adjustment was helpful. So they're not so much the regular school district, but certainly the tech, there can be significant volatility there.
Would the other committee members like to have a discussion about the other capital items this evening, or hold those until our department heads join us to talk specifically about their operating budgets and their capital? I think we do both. I'll just kind of throw it out there to the committee.
I think it makes sense to have the department head here to talk us through some of these, the need, and are they an actual cost control item, or not? That sort of question.
Yeah, and I would say particularly on public safety, Finn, there's a lot of big ticket items there. And if you look at like communication radios, like that's one where I think your grant question circles back. Like, what are our opportunities there to maybe mitigate that cost with some grants? And what's the status of that?
Yeah, in fact, Scott will remember that this was on the budget last year. We had approved a $20,900 10% match in order to get a grant for the balance for $209,000 worth of communications radio. So I was a little surprised to see it here again in 25, since that was in the FY24 budget. So I don't know if we didn't get the grant or if there was a delay in getting the grant or what's going on. But now this is showing us actually just purchasing $209,000 worth of radios, and we put the 20,900 back, took it out of the operating budget, put it back into the operating budget, I should say, as a reduction. So I'd be curious to hear what happened to last year's grant request.
Yeah, so it's an interesting point you raised, Jeff, because if that was the case, I didn't pick up on that. I wasn't here last year, but I didn't pick up on that. So if we did put 20,900, we used free cash to sort of set that aside as a grant match. If the grant in fact does fall through, that means you already have, almost $21,000 that's been appropriated that can't be used for anything other than that grant match. So you would reappropriate that to help, drop that, we only really need $180,000 or $189,000 to actually fulfill this request if in fact the grant has fallen through. Or it could just be that this is still on here because the grant wasn't, finalized and done last year. So, we're still moving forward with the purchase, but the hope is that the grant money will come through for this. So certainly the chief can answer that in more detail.
Yeah, in fact, that was not a use of free cash. That explains why the my understanding is that explains why the budget, the expense budget for the fire department went down from FY 24 to 25 because it included 20,900 as our match for those radios.
Yeah. Right. I actually remember that from the fire budget. Just trying to scroll over to that now.
So that's not a recurring expense. It was in 24. It's not recurring, so it came out in 25, which explains why our expenses were down. But it still begs the question, what happened to that grant application last year?
Good. Yeah. So that's what that was at 75, and we're dropped down to 22. Yeah. So that's actually even a bigger number than that, right? It's closer to. Yeah, that's 53,000. And there, I'm not 100% sure on this. I know there are portable radios and there are truck radios. So I know in Essex we had, they were two different things. So I don't know if the 53,000 was, could have been just certain portable radios they purchased last year, or it could have been, just truck radios. But yeah, we can get more clarity on that from the chief. Because that's 53. That's not even the 20,900.
Okay, then why don't we continue? Then we'll hold additional discussion about capital requests. One until the meeting next week, where the finance department is making that presentation to the select board of any requests, and it'll be a cleaned up spreadsheet from what we're seeing here, and when we have an opportunity to speak directly with the department heads. Next item on the agenda are matters not anticipated by the chair, and I would just offer a little bit of an update on schools, since at 4 o'clock this afternoon there was the third of the so-called quintuple chairs meeting with the schools. So select board and finance committee of Hamilton and Wenham, with the school superintendent and the head of the school committee. And as they had been predicting, and as Steve and Jeff had penciled in their budget that we've been looking at, the schools are in fact down at the targeted approximately just under 3% increase that we had been anticipating. The original budget indicated, this is operating expenses. I want to distinguish that from the overall increase in the schools, because this will be the first year that the debt service for the Fields project is included in our budget. So, speaking specifically about the operating budget for the schools, the initial total increase that they had provided back in November was 3.72%. They are currently at 2.89%, of which Wenham's share is a 2.68% increase, which is actually less, I think, than the placeholder.
Yeah.
The placeholder was 2.94, so
right.
Frees up a little bit of money. I might cover that red ink that we saw in the last.
Yes, it probably would, or come pretty close to it.
And what they had indicated was that the way they got there was largely through staff reductions. they continue to evaluate the staffing needs across the entire school system. What the high school is experiencing, well, actually, let me back up. What the school system is experiencing is increases at the elementary school level, but there is a loss of students as they move from junior high school into high school, heading into private schools, heading into Essex Tech. So what we're seeing in the budget is increases at the elementary schools to cover that growing population of students, but decreases at the high school level, which results in a net decrease in FTEs of the latest numbers, almost seven FTEs are proposed and reductions from FY24 to 25, which helps keep the budget in line and is going to bring it in slightly less than what we had been projecting. Now, when you layer in the debt service for the Fields project, and they have borrowed approximately 10 million for the Fields project, plus some other lesser, smaller projects. We're looking at the school's budget increasing by just over 7%, 7.35%. But good news on the operating budget. It's nice to see that it's going to come in where our placeholder was. And the schools had mentioned that it's a 10-year borrowing, 10-year amortization. They are fixing the interest rate for the first year at 3.9%. And have the opportunity sometime between now and a year from now to lock that in. Or Jeff, I think you have more information about how borrowings can take place at a municipal level, shorter term than 30-year bonds. But
yeah, so
might be able to continue to roll that short term or lock it in.
Yeah, so I don't know about outside municipal, but in municipal, you hear the term used a lot, BAN, BAN, bond anticipatory note. And there's a program through the state, they call them State House notes. And it's a program that municipalities and school districts can use that allows us to sort of like underneath the umbrella of the state, bond on a short-term basis. So basically we do short-term bonds under the umbrella of the state. So there's a lot less underwriting cost and all that type of stuff up front. And basically you just redo the bonds every year, at a new interest rate. And so you can either just sort of pay interest only and re-up for a few years, but after a while, they like to have you on a plan to sort of pay off the entire balance by 10 years from the original inception. In this type of rate environment, it's very appealing because, you wouldn't necessarily want to lock into a, huge bond right now at a fixed rate over the next, 15 years, 30 years. So using the state program will allow you the flexibility to, maybe kind of wait for your rates to settle or whatever before you kind of finalize and lock in some rates. And I was saying to Jeff earlier, the town of Wenham does a really nice job. It's clearly like how they approach debt. We tend to use these state house notes when we buy things or group things together and buy them and use the state house note program to amortize it over 10 years. minimize our sort of upfront, kind of underwriting costs and all that. And it allows us to stay kind of flexible. Probably easier to do with the smaller stuff we buy. Even the fields at 15 years, $15 million, they may want to lock into a fixed rate, longer term bond at some point. But my suspicion is they're using a state house note right now to sort of tread some water until they get some more certainty on the bond market.
Yeah, and my understanding actually is that the plan for the athletic fields is to keep it on a 10-year amortization.
Yeah, and if you can, I mean, that's fantastic. And the rates are usually pretty good on the reset each year with the state. So that a lot of times that's the only reason you might lock in with a real actual bond you go to market with, is that you can lock in a better fixed rate.
Yeah, we didn't spend a lot of time talking about what is coming, but it is part of what the schools will be presenting to the school committee soon. I think it's a 5-year capital budget. And Steve Poulos had asked that we get a copy of that once it is in fact available, so that we can incorporate that into our annual meeting presentation. It is something that Hamilton has done. They've made a very concerted effort of being as transparent as they can about the future projects. And even outside the large schools project that'll be coming up in the next year or so, a couple of years, I guess, they still have something like 18 million in capital spending just to maintain the existing aging facilities. So that, in addition to the Fields project, in addition to a new elementary school, is something that we want to be providing as much forewarning, I guess is the best word, to Wenham taxpayers as we can. This is work that the Hamilton Finance Committee has done, and I think they made that presentation last year. And we'll try to do the same.
I was going to ask that question, Jeff C., about what our responsibility as a committee is going to be here, right? Because I think you and I, we've spoken, as you just mentioned now, about how there's a huge fall off in the student count from Hamilton and Wenham into the high school, which is kind of disappointing. And so whether or not I don't remember what you said, something like 13 different options that they were evaluating for possible middle and high school, and with the school system, it sounds like that's something we don't have to, as a committee, be involved in. We'll get the results of their decision, right, and how that goes. But I think your comment about I think we'd spoken like at a previous meeting about what are we going to do at the town meeting? What are we going to say, and how do we say it? About here are some material expenses or expensive things that are coming down the pike soon. Here's a call to action. Please, we've got the trash, we've got the school system, we've got the water, all those things that we talked about before. This is one of them, right? And that can be maybe the extent of our responsibility to as we look at least for the next year.
Yeah, and I have, I mean, it's one piece of the pie, as you just mentioned, but I had built, before I left Essex, sort of this forward-looking debt schedule that I tried to consolidate into kind of a one-pager for folks to just, whether we can put it up on the web or we can make it part of the, certainly the warrant booklet that we do, or whatever. But yeah, I think you have to kind of make people aware of all those parts and pieces. And, the last piece I was trying to do in Essex was, they had built a school in Manchester, and there was an Essex Elementary was going to be on the horizon. And so, I was working with the finance director who's now left the district to say, like, can you start giving me some, baseline, like, what are your fiscal advisors telling you, what's going to be the interest rate, what's going to be the term, so we can build out at least a mock like this, I think it's sort of the same thing here, like replacing Bucher and replacing whatever the other, middle high school in Hamilton Wenham is. Those are all on the table. So have those all in there in a bucket, under a column. This is the potential for the middle high school project. This is the other school in Hamilton, and this is the Bucher school, so people can see it and see, the finance committee does or can certainly get involved in all of this process, because when things are working well and you have these quintuple board meetings and things where everybody can put their cards on the table and you all try to sort of work around, you look for gaps in this kind of ongoing debt chart where you can sort of fit things in. You don't just say, like, you don't just lay the projects out and say we're doing them. You try to, like, look at that debt chart the best you can to say, if we can, in Essex, it was like we agreed to do the Manchester school first, and then the hope was that we could, the Essex elementary project would be like 2030, so that the high school debt would be paid off. So we really tried to make that work. But sometimes life has other plans, and in Essex, things started to happen at the Essex Elementary School where you said it would be great if we could wait until the high school debt was paid off, but we also don't want to put on a $2 million roof on a building that's, not going to make it. But at least, we could show we were trying to, mix and match to make things work for the taxpayer as best they can, and then obviously Hamilton, Wenham each have their own capital and bonding projects to layer on top of that. So when the relationship between, the two towns and the school are going well, you really do try to work together as best you can to sort of, make it the best experience for all three parties you can. I mean, it doesn't always line up, but at least if you're working together well, you can try and do that. And I can say that in Essex, as treasurer and certainly as a member of the finance committee, we would even get involved in some of the decisions as we were, once we were doing a project and maybe we were using short-term bonding to work our way through, the school would, all of us would weigh in on things like, when do we go to, an actual amortized bond? When, do we want to make level principal payments, or do we want to make, just level payment, just regular level debt payments? Which, the level principal payments, work out, they're bigger payments up front, but they save you interest over time. Typically, I think we sided with doing that, but, we did, I think on one tranche of bonds, we did actually say, Essex is really tight right now. We need to go level debt service on this one, because we can't afford the higher, payments in the early years in this particular time frame. So, I think you do have the ability to be kind of involved in some of these discussions, even after sort of the decision to do the project has been made. You can still be involved and make decisions that help, shape how the payments actually work out, and do it in a way that, helps to kind of, mitigate the tax impact in Wenham if we can.
Yeah, correct me if I'm wrong, Scott, but my understanding is that the decision is between rebuilding Cutler or Winthrop, or combining them into a single elementary school, and that, Bucher's not involved in that discussion. So in that respect, this is kind of, we're 33-ish% of the cost of the schools, but the location of these two elementary schools are both in Hamilton, so they have the added challenge of and pressure from their own taxpayers of maybe combining the schools into a single, and then taking a piece of property that currently is not taxed because it is a school, and making it available for commercial development, which could help Hamilton certainly. that's the decision point? It's
Yeah,
It's
that's all. I would say the only thing to add is that there also are
Cutler and
renovation
Winthrop.
options. It's Cutler and Winthrop, but there also are renovation options. So it's not just rebuilding one or the other or combining both into one. It's potentially the opportunity to renovate. There is the other complication or the other aspect too that I believe Winthrop is on a lease, which is up within the next 1 or 2 years. That
That
land.
was, yeah, that was actually
Um,
mentioned this afternoon that
yeah,
Hamilton apparently is open to renewing that lease under certain conditions.
yeah, and that also plays into so that lease would have to be renewed if they were to go forward with that property.
Mhm.
The lease would have to be renewed prior to submittal to the state for any reimbursement because part of the reimbursement criteria is that the school can exist for a substantial period of time.
Yes, I think the
And
period
so,
that they were talking about is under discussion for lease of the property underneath the school is 50 years.
yeah, and so that all they have to work out all that too, which obviously is
Mm.
not related to us directly.
Yeah. But point being, of course, that transparency, there are some large capital expenditures on the horizon, regardless of what the decision is to build or not build or fix. That yeah, I think it's incumbent on us to give the taxpayers of Wenham a preview of so that they're informed about what's coming. And of course, we also, as I've mentioned, and this is maybe a lesser item, but we have the enrollment, the apportionment shift, which is always moving. It's a 3-year average of the student population between Hamilton and Wenham that's going to be shifting against Wenham unless something drastic happens. Just dropping off the enrollment at the measurement period is October 1st. So October 1, 2021, 22, and 23 is what the 3-year rolling average is based on right now. If you drop off October 1, 2021, and you keep the numbers as they existed between Hamilton and Wenham equal in 23 into 24, the new rolling average is going to shift 19 basis points against Wenham, and meaning it's going to shift expense 19 basis points in additional expense toward us of the overall school budget. So that's another potential use of stabilization fund to help smooth out that. And these numbers, this information is what will be shared later this month when all members of the uh, finance select boards and school committees come together. I think that meeting is January 30th. Yes, January 30. And then between now and then, the school and the school superintendent will continue to make presentations to the school board, and they'll be that much closer to final numbers, both on the capital spend and budget. That's what I had for our agenda this evening. I'll toss it out there to the committee if there are other topics you'd like to bring up while we're on the call together. Okay, hearing none, I'll just point out that our next meeting is a week from tonight, and that will be with Kim Butler from the library to talk about her operating budget and capital request. And also on the agenda for next week is the first discussion and voting of if we can identify some kind of so-called low-hanging fruit on the budget requests for the departments here in Wenham. We would move through each category, departmental category, and take a vote. Are we in favor? Are we not in favor? Are we looking for more information? And then that is collectively what represents our recommendation at annual town meeting to support or not support the warrant for the operating budget. And then, later on, I guess starting in February, and we'll start to see what those warrant articles are that have a dollar or a spending component, and we'll also weigh in on those. But first up will be the operating and capital budget requests. So we'll start looking at those departments next week. Presumably there are some that we don't have a lot of comment on and can kind of start to tick off as we move toward a vote on all of them. Okay, then. I think we're coming to the end here. So somebody would like to make a motion to close the meeting.
This is Finn. I'll make the motion to close the Wenham Finance and Advisory Committee.
I'll second the motion.
8:08.
All right, we've got a second. So all in favor of adjourning the meeting of the Wenham Finance Committee at 8:08 p.m. January 10. Jeff Calder, yes.
Dave Harnish, yes.
Scott Schoenberger, yes.
Finn Sprague, yes.
Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you, Jeff. Have a good night, everyone.